I walked into that ballroom as a proud father and walked out as a laughingstock, accused by my own son of being nothing more than a delusional servant. While security hauled me away and the room applauded his cruelty, I realized something terrifyingly clear. The man they just disgraced was the only one who could legally dismantle the empire standing behind him, and I no longer had any reason to protect it. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. I didn't fight them. That's the part people don't understand when they replay the clip online. They expect rage, shouting some dramatic collapse. But when those two security guards took hold of my arms, I went quietly. Not because I was weak, because I was listening. Laughter carries information, so does silence. And in that room, the laughter told me exactly who believed him, who didn't, and who was already calculating how to survive, if he ever fell. The ballroom was the kind of place designed to make you feel small if you didn't belong. Gold trim, mirrored walls, men in tailored suits who spoke softly because they were used to being obeyed. I had belonged there once, not as a guest, not as a face, but as something far more dangerous. A foundation. Foundations don't get applause. They get buried. As they dragged me past the tables, I recognized faces that stiffened when they saw me. One man dropped his eyes into his drink, another forced a smile that didn't reach his jaw. A woman I'd once helped out of a federal investigation stared straight ahead like I was already dead. My son never looked away. He watched me the way you watch a door closing behind you, relieved it finally shut. Outside, the noise cut off too cleanly. Heavy doors, thick glass, the kind of separation money buys. One of the guards cleared his throat and said, "Sir, you can wait by the valet." Sir. Funny how fast titles change. I stood there for a moment, breathing in cold air, letting my heartbeat settle. I wasn't embarrassed, not yet. Embarrassment comes when you accept the stories someone tells about you. I hadn't accepted anything. I was still running numbers in my head, still aligning memories, still seeing the structure beneath the spectacle. I drove home alone. No calls, no messages. My phone stayed dark, which told me more than 1,000 apologies would have. People don't rush to defend a servant. They wait to see if the servant stays down. At home, I poured myself a drink I'd been saving for a day worth marking. I didn't toast. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at a spot on the wall where an old picture used to hang. My son, maybe 12 years old, standing beside me in a warehouse we'd just bought cheap because the previous owner thought it was worthless. I had taught him that lesson early. Value is what others overlook. Somewhere along the way, he'd applied it to me. The truth is, I let him believe his own myth because it served us both. Publicly, he was the visionary. Privately, he was still calling me late at night, when a deal didn't make sense, when a clause felt wrong, when someone powerful made him nervous. I never asked for credit. Credit creates visibility. Visibility creates vulnerability. Everything was structured that way for a reason. The company, the subsidiaries, the trusts. None of it was simple. It couldn't be. Simplicity invites takeover. Years ago, when he was still young enough to think loyalty was permanent, I'd built safeguards into everything, not out of paranoia, out of experience. Men change when applause gets louder than memory. I finished my drink and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in a long time. Inside were documents no one thought mattered anymore. Old agreements written in language so dry it put lawyers to sleep. Contingency clauses, emergency authorities, the kind of things people sign when they trust you completely and never imagine you'll be the emergency. I didn't smile. Revenge, real revenge, doesn't feel like triumph at first. It feels like clarity, like a fog lifting and showing you the terrain exactly as it is, not as you hoped it would be. The next morning, the video was everywhere, cropped, captioned, analyzed by people who had never built anything more complicated than an opinion. Self-made CEO humiliates delusional old man. Security removes disruptive guest. The word father appeared in exactly none of them. I watched it once. just once, long enough to notice how confidently he lied, how easily the room accepted it, how quickly the story locked into place. Stories are hard to break once they harden, hard but not impossible. I didn't call him. That mattered. He expected a call, anger, begging, threats. Silence unsettles people like him. Silence suggests you're busy. Instead, I made a different call, to a man who had signed off on more than he remembered, a man who owed his position to decisions I'd made quietly, years before my son ever sat in a corner office. I didn't explain, I didn't accuse. I asked him to pull a specific file and read Section 17, subsection C. There was a pause, paper rustling, a sharp inhale. I forgot about this, he said. Most people did, I replied. By afternoon, things started moving without my name attached to them. Meetings rescheduled. Advisors called in. Lawyers suddenly unsure about assumptions they'd treated as facts for years. My son went from interviews to closed-door sessions without understanding why. That evening, he finally called. His voice was calm, but too careful. "What are you doing?" he asked. Like a man trying not to spook an animal he suddenly realizes might still have teeth. "I'm doing nothing," I said truthfully. "I'm just not stopping anything anymore." He laughed, sharp and dismissive, but there was a crack in it. "You think you still have power?" I looked around my quiet house, at the walls that had heard every decision before it ever reached a boardroom. "You think power announces itself?" I asked. He hung up. That night I slept deeply for the first time in months. Not because I'd won anything, because the pretending was over. Fathers are expected to forgive. Servants are expected to disappear. I was done being either. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the city hum, a city that ran on systems I helped design, I understood something my son hadn't learned yet. Empires don't fall when enemies attack them. They fall when the people who built them stop holding the pieces together. I woke before sunrise with that sentence still sitting in my chest, not like anger, more like gravity, the kind that pulls everything toward a conclusion whether anyone wants it or not. I made coffee, black, and stood at the kitchen window watching the street come alive. Garbage trucks, joggers, delivery vans, people doing jobs that keep things running without applause. I'd always respected that more than any award my son ever held. By mid-morning, the first real tremor hit. I didn't see it directly. That's how these things work. You feel it through other people's reactions. My phone lit up, not with his name, but with numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Former partners, advisors, one regulator who never called unless something was already wrong. I let most of them go to voicemail. When I did answer, I kept my voice steady, almost bored. I didn't deny anything. I didn't confirm anything. I just listened. People reveal more when they think you're calm because you're irrelevant. A word here, a hesitation there. By noon, I knew exactly where the fractures were spreading. My son tried again that afternoon. This time, he didn't bother with casual. "You're causing instability," he said. "People are nervous." "That happens," I replied, "when they realize they don't know who's really in charge." "You embarrassed yourself," he snapped. "You want revenge because you couldn't stand being exposed." There it was, projection wrapped in certainty. I almost corrected him, almost told him the truth, that the embarrassment wasn't the lie he told, but how little effort it took for everyone to believe it. But correction would have helped him. Silence wouldn't. "You should focus on your meetings," I said instead. "I hear you have a long week." He didn't respond. He hung up again, harder this time, as if force could change outcomes. Over the next few days, the empire began doing what all complex systems do when a keystone is quietly removed. It started compensating. Committees formed, consultants were hired, emails multiplied, decisions slowed. No one wanted to be the one holding responsibility if things went wrong. I watched from a distance. I went about my routine, grocery store, a walk around the neighborhood, coffee with an old friend who didn't ask questions because he already knew the answers would be unpleasant. The more ordinary I appeared, the more unsettling it became for people who were used to power looking loud. The board called an emergency session without him knowing who requested it. That detail mattered. When leadership stops controlling the calendar, authority has already begun to leak. He found out an hour before it started, blindsided, scrambling to assert confidence he hadn't realized he'd lost. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. My presence would have turned it into a spectacle. Absence turned it into an audit. That evening, a journalist reached out, not one of the flashy ones, a patient one. The kind who waits years to publish a single piece because timing is more important than speed. She asked careful questions about history, about ownership, about my role. "I'm not interested in revenge stories," she said. "I'm interested in contradictions." "So am I," replied. I didn't give her documents. I didn't give her accusations. I gave her context, names, dates, suggestions of where to look. That's all a good reporter ever really needs. By the end of the week, the tone shifted publicly. The headlines softened, then sharpened again in a different direction. Words like complex and unclear appeared. Analysts began using phrases like unexpected governance concerns. My son went from smiling interviews to carefully worded statements approved by lawyers, who charged by the hour and spoke by the comma. He came to my house on a Saturday morning without calling first. That surprised me. He stood on the porch like a stranger, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the place as if it had shrunk. Maybe it had, or maybe he'd just grown used to rooms designed to make him feel bigger. "We need to talk," he said. "We always did," I answered, stepping aside. He didn't sit. He paced. He talked fast, laying out strategies, optics, damage control. He spoke to me the way executives speak to consultants they don't fully trust but still need. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he acknowledge the stage, the microphone, the laughter. "You can still fix this," he said finally. "You just have to clarify your role. Tell them you were confused, old, emotional." I looked at him, really looked, and felt something settle that I hadn't let myself feel before. Not hatred, not sadness, distance. "You want me to disappear again?" I said. "This is bigger than us," he replied quickly. "It always was," I said. "That's why I built it the way I did." He stopped pacing. "You think you're punishing me," he said, "but you're hurting a lot of people." "I know," I replied. "That's why I waited so long." He stared at me then, trying to reconcile the father he'd dismissed with the man in front of him. "Why now?" he asked. "Why do this to me?" I considered the question. "Because you did it in public," I said, "and because you were wrong." His jaw tightened. "You want me ruined." "I want the truth visible," I answered. "What it ruins is up to you." He left without another word. The following Monday, a formal inquiry was announced. Nothing dramatic, no sirens, just a press release filled with careful language and open-ended timelines. Markets hate uncertainty more than bad news. The stock dipped, then dipped again. Investors began asking questions they should have asked years ago. Through it all, my son stayed in front of cameras, insisting everything was fine. Confidence, I'd taught him once, is most convincing when it doesn't need to insist. He'd forgotten that lesson too. I received a letter from the board requesting my historical insight. I didn't reply immediately. When I did, I agreed to meet. On my terms. Not as an employee. Not as a servant. As a witness. The night before that meeting, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was nervous, but because memory has a way of crowding in when resolution approaches. I thought about the choices I'd made, the compromises, the protections. I wondered if there had been a moment where this path could have bent another way. In the end, it didn't matter. Regret doesn't rebuild structures. It only decorates ruins. When I walked into that boardroom the next morning, the room went quiet. Not with hostility, with recognition. Some of them nodded. Some avoided my eyes. All of them listened. I spoke plainly. Slowly. I explained how things were built, why they were built that way, and what happens when you pretend foundations don't matter. I didn't mention my son by name. I didn't have to. Every sentence pointed in his direction without accusation. When I finished, no one clapped. They thanked me. Outside, as I stepped into the light, my phone buzzed with a message from him. Just one line. You've made your point. I looked at the screen, then at the sky, gray and unmoving, and understood that points were no longer the issue. The next phase wouldn't be about arguments or narratives. It would be about consequences. Consequences don't arrive loudly. They don't kick down doors or raise their voices. They show up in calendars, in signatures withheld, in quiet decisions made by people who suddenly realize they have options. I'd seen it before, from the other side. Now I was watching it happen to my own son, and that was a weight I carried without complaint. The inquiry moved forward with the patience of something that knew it had time. Documents were requested, then requested again. Timelines slipped. Forecasts were revised. Each small adjustment shaved a little more certainty off his authority. He was still the face of the company, but faces don't hold things together. Trust does. He tried to rally people. I heard about it secondhand. Emergency town halls, carefully worded emails reminding everyone of the mission. Loyalty speeches always come too late. When people start asking whether they'll still have jobs in 6 months, mission statements read like fiction. I stayed out of sight. That mattered. If I'd appeared eager, it would have looked personal. Instead, it looked structural. I became a reference point, not a participant. The man behind the curtain people suddenly realized had always been there. One afternoon, a former board member asked me if I felt vindicated. No, I said. I feel finished. He didn't understand that. Most people don't. They think revenge is about watching someone else suffer. It isn't. It's about removing the burden of restraint, about no longer spending energy holding something together that's determined to come apart. The final break came quietly. A vote narrowly passed to temporarily suspend executive authority pending the outcome of the inquiry. Temporary is a dangerous word. It sounds harmless. It gives everyone cover. But power hates vacuums, and temporary spaces fill fast. My son called me that night, long after the news broke. His voice was different, stripped down. They're pushing me out, he said. They're protecting themselves, I replied. That's what people do when they're scared. You could stop this, he said. There was no accusation left in him, just a plea. You know how. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I saw him as a child again, asleep in the back seat while I drove home from long days, trusting completely that I knew where we were going. I already stopped something, I said softly. I stopped pretending. There was silence on the line. Then, I needed you to stay small, he said, almost to himself. You were easier that way. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to clarify. The inquiry concluded months later, not with fireworks, with findings, recommendations, structural changes. My son resigned before he could be formally removed. His statement was gracious, polished, full of words like gratitude and transition. Reputation doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes. I wasn't mentioned publicly, not directly. I existed in footnotes, in acknowledgments of historical contributors. That was fine. Being seen had never been the point. Being understood had. We didn't speak after that. Not because I refused. Because there was nothing left that required my voice. He moved on to other ventures, other circles where his name still opened doors, just not as many, and not as easily. I returned to a quieter life, one that fit me better than I'd admitted before. Sometimes people ask if I regret not reconciling. They expect a neat ending, a handshake, closure wrapped in forgiveness. But real endings aren't neat. They're honest. I loved my son. I still do. That never changed. What changed was my willingness to be erased for the sake of his comfort. Love without truth is just another kind of servitude. On certain evenings, I walked past buildings I helped bring into existence. Glass towers catching the last light of day. People inside working late, unaware of the layers beneath them. I don't feel ownership. I feel distance and relief. I think about that night in the ballroom sometimes. The laughter, the certainty on his face, the way the room believed the story it was given because it was easier than questioning power. I don't replay it with bitterness anymore. I replay it as the moment everything finally aligned. Public humiliation is a sharp tool. It cuts both ways. He used it to try to end me. Instead, it cut the last thread holding the illusion together. If there's a lesson in all this, it isn't about revenge, it's about foundations, about remembering who built what and why, about understanding that when you mistake silence for weakness, you risk waking something that no longer feels obligated to protect you. I didn't burn the empire down, I stepped away, and once I did, it collapsed under the weight of everything it had been pretending not to be. If this story meant something to you, like the video, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts below. Thanks for listening.